Okay, so you want to own a fourplex. You've seen the pitch. Maybe on YouTube, maybe from a guy at a barbecue who won't stop talking about his portfolio. You buy a building with 4 units. You move into one. You rent out the other 3. Your tenants' rent checks cover the mortgage. You live for free. That's the whole pitch. And the way in is almost stupidly cheap because you're not buying it as an investor. You're buying it as a homeowner who happens to have 3 extra kitchens. That's what an FHA loan lets you do. 3.5% down on a building with up to 4 units as long as you live in one of them. In a lot of the country, that's a real building. Indianapolis, Cleveland, Kansas City. A solid brick fourplex runs somewhere around $550,000 to $650,000. 3.5% of that is about $19,000 to $23,000 down. Compare that to a regular house in the same city. Same down payment gets you a duplex or a single-family place with no rent coming in at all. Here, 3 other units are paying you the whole time you live there. This is why it's become the starter deal on every real estate forum on the internet. Bigger Pockets built entire content categories around it. People call it house hacking, like it's a life hack instead of a mortgage. The logic sounds airtight. 4 rent checks, 1 mortgage payment. The math should just work itself out every single month. So far, that all checks out. It's real. People do this every year in every one of those cities. Here's the part they leave out. That whole pitch. Tenants pay your mortgage quietly assumes something. It assumes every unit is rented, every month, forever. A fourplex only has 4 units, not 40. 4. So do the math on what 1 empty unit actually means here. 1 vacancy in a 40-unit apartment building is a rounding error. 2.5% of your income gone for a month. 1 vacancy in a fourplex is 25% of your income gone. Overnight, not a dip. A quarter of the whole building empty. And that mortgage payment doesn't care. It's due on the first whether 3 units are rented or 0. So when that unit sits empty for 6 weeks while you find a new tenant, somebody still has to cover the gap. That somebody is you, not your tenants. You. The pitch says tenants pay your mortgage. The real version is tenants pay your mortgage until one of them moves out, and then you do. We're going to come back to that gap because it's the reason a good chunk of first-time fourplex owners get into real trouble in year 1. We're also going to come back to something else. The rent spread, tenant rent minus your mortgage, is not actually where the real money in this deal gets made. There's a bigger mechanism running underneath the rent checks, and almost nobody selling you this deal talks about it. 2 people are going to come up again later in this video. One of them bought a single fourplex in Indianapolis and turned it into 8 units in under 2 years. The other one bought a fourplex sight unseen, trusted the numbers a seller emailed him, and sold at a $60,000 loss 18 months later. Same asset class. Same starter deal everyone on the internet says is the safe one. Wildly different outcomes. We'll get to both of them. But first, let's check whether the basic pitch even holds up on paper. So is it just the rent covering the mortgage? That's the whole pitch, right? 4 units, 4 rent checks, 1 mortgage payment. Basic math. And on paper, it actually works. Let's run real numbers on a real deal. Say you buy a $600,000 fourplex. 4 2-bedroom units, each renting for $1,100 a month. That's $4,400 a month coming in, before anything gets taken out. $52,800 a year in gross rent, just sitting there on a spreadsheet. Now the mortgage side. FHA loan, 3.5% down, so you're financing about $596,000 of that $600,000 price. At around 7% interest. Over 30 years, principal and interest alone runs close to $3,965 a month. And that number already includes your property tax and insurance escrow, plus FHA's mortgage insurance premium. So take $4,400 in rent, subtract $3,965 in mortgage payment. You clear $435 a month, $435. Not life-changing, but positive. The tenants are covering the loan, and you're pocketing the difference. That's the number every fourplex listing on Zillow and every Bigger Pockets forum post leads with. And it's not fake. It's real math on a real rent roll. But it's also the wrong number. Here's what it leaves out. That $435 assumes every unit is rented, every month, forever. No vacancies, no late payments, no unit sitting empty while you find a new tenant. In the real world, tenants move. Leases end. People lose jobs, get divorced, buy a house of their own. A typical vacancy rate on small multifamily runs around 5% a year, even in a decent market. On $52,800 in annual rent, that's about $2,640 a year you should expect to just not collect. That's before a single repair, before a single phone call about a broken dishwasher. Now add maintenance, not emergencies, just normal wear, a leaking faucet, a busted garbage disposal, a cracked window. Standard reserve for that is 10% of rent. Another $5,280 a year gone before you see it. Then capital expenditures, the big stuff, roof, water heater, furnace, parking lot. These don't happen every year, but when they hit hard, so you reserve 10% of rent for them too. That's another $5,280 a year set aside for a roof you might not replace for a decade. And even if you plan to manage the property yourself, living in one unit, walking downstairs to fix things, you should still reserve for management, because your time isn't free. Call it 8%, or $4,224 a year. Add those four reserves together: vacancy, maintenance, capex, management. 5,280 plus 5,280 plus 4,224 plus 2,640. That's $17,424 a year. In reserves you should be setting aside, whether you spend it this year or not. Divide that by 12. That's $1,452 a month, quietly missing from the $435 you thought you were clearing. Run that against your actual monthly numbers, and the picture flips completely. $435 in profit minus $1,452 in reserves is a loss of just over $1,000 a month. Some investors use a shortcut called the 50% rule. Assume half your gross rent goes to operating costs before the mortgage. Half of $4,400 is $2,200. Subtract that from rent, and you've got $2,200 left to cover a $3,965 mortgage. That's a $1,765 monthly gap. Different method, same brutal answer. Either way you slice it, the deal that looked like it clears $435 a month is actually underwater most months. So no, it's not just rent minus mortgage. That math was never the real math. The $435 spreadsheet number is what gets a deal funded. It's not what a deal actually pays out. So if the rent minus mortgage math doesn't hold up, and the reserve math says you're losing money, why does anybody still buy these things? Why do experienced investors keep doing this deal on purpose? Because the real return on a fourplex was never sitting in that $435 line. It's somewhere else entirely, and most first-time buyers never even look for it. So what does it actually cost to get in? Not the down payment, the whole stack around it, and almost nobody adds that part up front. Start with the purchase price itself, because that number swings harder than most people expect. In Indianapolis, Cleveland, or Kansas City, a decent fourplex runs $450,000 to $650,000. In Denver or Sacramento, the same 4 walls and 4 kitchens can run $900,000 to $1.1 million or more. Same building, same rent math. Completely different price tag just because of the zip code. If you're moving in yourself, FHA lets you put down 3.5% on a $580,000 fourplex. That's about $20,300 to walk in the door. But that loan only exists if you actually live in one of the units. Buy it as a pure investment, never planning to live there, and the down payment jumps to a conventional 20 to 25%. On that same $580,000 building, 25% down is $145,000, not 20 grand. $145,000, same address, same rent roll, and the entry cost just changed by over $120,000 depending on one box you check on a form. And the down payment is just the headline number. It's not close to the full bill. Closing costs alone run 2 to 4% of the purchase price. On a $600,000 fourplex, that's $15,000 to $24,000, due at the table, separate from the down payment. Then you need an inspection, and a fourplex isn't a one-unit job. 4 kitchens, 4 bathrooms, 4 HVAC setups if you're unlucky, sometimes one shared roof over all of it. A real inspection on a building like that runs $800 to $1,500, and skipping it to save money is how people inherit a $20,000 problem. Now add the repairs that show up the week you get the keys. Older multifamily stock built in the 60s or 70s almost never hands you 4 move-in ready units. One unit needs new flooring, another needs a water heater. Somebody's kitchen hasn't been touched since Nixon was president. Investors budget $10,000 to $20,000 just for that first wave of repairs before a single tenant signs a new lease. Add it up. Down payment, closing costs, inspection and repair reserve. On the low end, an FHA house hack in a Midwest metro, you're looking at $35,000 to $55,000 all in. On the high end, a conventional investor purchase in a pricier metro, that number climbs past $150,000. But here's the part that trips up a lot of buyers before they even get to closing. FHA doesn't just hand out 3.5% down loans on any fourplex you point at. There's a rule called the self-sufficiency test, and it kills more cheap deals than bad credit does. The rule says the net rental income from the other 3 units has to cover 75 to 100% of your total monthly payment. That's principal, interest, taxes, and insurance combined. All of it, covered mostly by rent from units you don't even live in. So a fourplex with a low price but weak rents can fail the test completely. The bank looks at the numbers and says no, even though the sale price looked like a steal. That's why the cheapest fourplex on the listing site is sometimes the one you can't actually finance with 3.5% down. So realistically, you're looking at $35,000 to $55,000 to get in on the low end, or $150,000 and up if you're buying as a straight investor in a hot market. Either way, that's the real number, not the $20,000 headline you see in the YouTube comments. And once you clear all of that and you're finally holding the keys, the question changes completely, because now you have to actually make the money back. And that's not the rent check everyone assumes it is. Okay, so where does the money actually come from? Not from one place, from 4 layers stacked on top of each other. And most owners only ever see the first one. Layer 1 is the one every listing agent leads with, the rent roll. 4 units at market rent. On that $600,000 Indianapolis fourplex, that's $4,400 a month advertised. That's the number on the flyer. It's also the least accurate number in the whole deal. Advertised rent assumes every unit is full. Every tenant pays on time, and nobody ever gets a discount to sign. Real landlords call the actual number effective rent, and it's always lower. 1 month of a concession to fill a unit fast, 1 week of vacancy between tenants, 1 late payment that turns into no payment, and that $4,400 quietly becomes $4,000 or less. So layer 1 is real money, but it's the shakiest layer, and it's the only one most first-time buyers ever calculate. Layer 2 is where it gets interesting, and almost nobody adds it up. You're living in one of the 4 units. That means you're not paying rent anywhere else. Compare that to the version of you who bought a regular house instead. That version is still writing a mortgage check with zero help from anybody. The house hacker's mortgage gets covered in part by the other 3 tenants. That's rent you're not paying, which functions exactly like income, even though no check ever hits your bank account. On top of that, you get to write off depreciation and operating costs on the 3 rented units against income the IRS actually taxes. Add up the rent you're not paying plus the tax savings, and real investors on bigger pockets put the number at $1,400 to $1,800 a month in benefit. That's a second income stream. It just never shows up as a deposit, so almost nobody adds it to their return calculation. Most owners mentally file it under free rent and move on. It's actually the second biggest lever in the whole deal. Layer 3 is where you stop collecting money and start manufacturing it. A fourplex is valued off comparable sales, same as a house. But raise the rent, and you raise what a buyer will pay for it too. Add in-unit laundry to each unit. Retile a bathroom. Convert unused basement storage into a legal 5th space where the city allows it. Each of those moves does 2 things at once. It raises the rent you can charge, and it raises the number an appraiser writes down. A $1.60 a month rent bump per unit sounds small. Across 4 units, held over 2 years, that's real equity showing up on paper. This is called forced appreciation, because you're not waiting on the market to move. You're making the number move yourself. And that sets up the layer nobody talks about on the listing page. Layer 4 is the one that actually explains why some people own 1 fourplex, and other people own 8. Here's the mechanic. After a year or 2 of rent growth and forced appreciation, you refinance the property. The bank sends a new appraiser. The appraiser sees higher rents and a fixed-up building and values it higher than what you paid. That new higher value lets you take out a new loan and pull cash out tax-free, because a refinance isn't a sale. You keep the building, you keep the tenants, you keep the cash flow, and you walk away with a check. On that Indianapolis property, 2 years of rent growth and a laundry upgrade can support pulling out $20,000 to $35,000 in a cash-out refinance. That's close to the entire down payment you put in on day 1, back in your pocket, while you still own the property. This is the part the tenants pay your mortgage pitch never mentions. The mortgage isn't the point, the refinance is the point. Investors on bigger pockets have a name for it: house hack and repeat. Buy one, live in it, force the value up, refinance, use that cash as the down payment on the next one. Do that twice, and you're not a guy with a fourplex anymore. You're a guy with 8 units, funded almost entirely by the first $20,000 you ever put down. That's the actual business model, not rent minus mortgage. Rent plus the tax break nobody counts, plus forced value, plus a bank willing to hand your down payment back to you with interest. 4 layers. Only the first one is on the flyer. So what's the stuff nobody warns you about? Start with the roof. One roof. Over 4 units, not spread across 20 apartments like a real complex. Just 4. A full tear-off and replacement on a fourplex runs $12,000 to $25,000, and there's no neighbor down the hall splitting that with 20 other tenants. It's you and 3 roommates who happen to pay rent. Same story with the furnace or the boiler. A lot of this housing stock is 60, 80, even 100 years old, built with one heating system for the whole building. It dies in January and every unit goes cold at once. That's one repair bill, not 4 small ones. Then there's the part nobody puts in the YouTube video. You live there too. Self-managing a distant rental is one thing. Self-managing your actual neighbors is another. The tenant in Unit 2 who's late on rent sees you taking out the trash every morning. You're not a landlord in an office 40 miles away. You're the guy next door, in person, every single day. And FHA doesn't let you leave either. The 3.5% down loan that got you in requires you to live in the property for at least 12 months. Job relocates in month 8. Family situation changes. Doesn't matter, you're staying or you're breaking the loan terms. Insurance is next, and it's not small. A single-family home might run $1,200 a year to insure. A 4-unit building with multiple tenants, shared systems, and higher liability exposure often runs $3,000 to $6,000 a year. That's a number a lot of first-time buyers pull straight off a single-family Zillow estimate and get badly wrong. Then property taxes catch up to you. The seller was paying tax on the old assessed value. The county reassesses after a sale, usually at or near your actual purchase price. On a $600,000 fourplex, that can push the tax bill up by hundreds of dollars a month, right after closing. The exact number that sat in your underwriting spreadsheet. Now here's how these things actually kill a deal. It's almost never one huge disaster. It's the gap between the number an owner used to qualify for the loan and the number that was actually true. Remember the $435 a month from the obvious answer section? The one before reserves? A lot of owners underwrite to that number, not the reserve-adjusted one. Then month 4 or 5 hits. 1 unit turns over, maybe 2, or the roof that was probably fine at inspection starts leaking into Unit 3. Either one alone can eat a year of thin cash flow in a single month. With no reserve account, there's nothing to cover it, so the owner covers it personally, out of pocket, month after month, until they can't anymore. And that's the trap folded into the pitch itself. The 3.5% down FHA loan is exactly what let you buy the building with almost no cash. It's also exactly why you have almost no cash left over when something breaks. The low bar to get in is the same reason so many owners get out at a loss. So who actually pulls this off? And who gets wiped out doing it? So who's actually doing this, and who's gotten burned? Start with the one who won. A woman in a green blazer, mid-30s, bought her first fourplex in Indianapolis for $580,000. FHA loan, 3.5% down, $20,300 out of pocket. That's less than a lot of people spend on a used car. She moved into the smallest unit and rented the other 3. She self-managed everything herself. Showings, repairs, rent collection, all of it. No property manager taking 8 to 10% off the top every month. That alone kept an extra few $100s in her pocket monthly. She also wasn't paying rent anywhere else. Remember that phantom income from Section 4? Between the two, she was saving close to $2,000 a month she'd never had before. She didn't spend it. She sat on it and let the building do its work. Rents in her neighborhood climbed. She raised hers to match, unit by unit. She added coin laundry in the basement, a small fix, a real bump in income. 2 years in, an appraiser came back with a number that surprised even her. The building was worth $80,000 more than she paid for it. She refinanced, pulled $35,000 out in cash, tax-free, and kept the building. Same tenants, same mortgage, same roof. Just $35,000 sitting in her account that wasn't there before. She used it as the down payment on a second fourplex across town. Today she controls 8 units off the original $20,300 she put down. That's the version of this that gets told on stage at real estate meetups. Now the one that doesn't get told. A different buyer, a different state, bought a fourplex in Cleveland for $625,000 sight unseen. He found it through a turnkey seller online, wired the deposit, never walked the property. He underwrote the deal using the seller's advertised gross rent. No vacancy reserve, no capex reserve. On paper, the spreadsheet the seller sent him looked like easy money. 4 months in, the roof failed. One roof, 4 units. No way to patch just a corner. The repair bill came to $28,000. He had about $6,000 sitting in the bank. While he was scrambling to cover it, 2 tenants moved out in the same month. Half his units empty, a $28,000 bill due, and no reserve to absorb either one. He missed a mortgage payment, then another. 18 months after closing, he sold the building for $60,000 less than he paid. Same asset class, same FHA-style math on paper. 2 completely different outcomes. The difference wasn't the building. It was whether someone had money set aside for the day something broke. So does this play out the same way everywhere, or does the math change by city? Does this play out the same way in every city? No, not even close. Everything so far assumed you're moving in. That's what makes the FHA loan possible in the first place. The government backs that 3.5% down loan because you're living there, not because you're an investor. There's a rule attached to it called the self-sufficiency test. Lenders use it on any FHA loan for 3 or 4 units. It checks whether the rent from the other units alone, discounted for vacancy, covers 75 to 100% of your full mortgage payment. Miss that number and the bank won't approve the loan no matter how much you make at your job. That single rule quietly kills a lot of cheap fourplex deals before they ever get an offer. Now say you're not moving in. Say you're buying it purely as a rental. Different game. No FHA. You're putting down 20 to 25% on a conventional investor loan. On a $600,000 fourplex, that's $120,000 to $150,000 out of pocket instead of $21,000. You lose the cheap entry, but you gain something the house hacker doesn't have. No shared walls with your tenants. No knock on your own door at 11 p.m. about a clogged sink. You're a landlord living somewhere else entirely, managing the property like a business instead of a living situation. Some investors will tell you that trade is worth 6 figures in down payment on its own. Now here's the part that changes everything about these numbers, where the building actually is. A fourplex in Indianapolis runs $400,000 to $500,000. Same in Toledo, same in Kansas City. Take that exact building and drop it in Denver, Austin, or Sacramento. Now it's $900,000 to $1.3 million. Same 4 walls, same 4 units, 3 times the price. That's not a small gap. That's the difference between a $20,000 entry and a $250,000 one. And rent doesn't scale up the same way price does. A unit renting for $1,100 in Indianapolis might rent for $2,200 in Austin. Double, not triple. So the coastal and Sunbelt version has a much higher price and a much lower cap rate, the ratio of income to what you paid. A Midwest fourplex might cap around 7 to 8%. The same building in Denver often caps closer to 4%. Lower cap rate isn't automatically a worse deal. It usually means the market's betting on appreciation instead of cash flow. Denver and Austin fourplex owners aren't getting rich on the spread between rent and mortgage. They're getting rich if the property is worth $400,000 more in 5 years. That's a bet on the city, not on the tenants. Very different game from the Indianapolis house hack. So which one's right depends entirely on what you're actually optimizing for. Cash flow now, in a cheaper metro, or appreciation later, in an expensive one. Rarely both. There's one more lever some owners pull deliberately, and it changes the whole legal category of the building. If local zoning allows it, you can add a legal 5th unit, a basement conversion, a backyard ADU. Do that and the fourplex stops being a fourplex. It's now a 5-unit property. That one extra unit crosses a line most owners never think about. 5 units and up gets valued completely differently. A 1 to 4 unit building is priced like a house, off comparable sales in the neighborhood. 5 units and up gets priced like a business, off its income. Appraisers use a cap rate on the actual net income, the same math as an apartment complex. That means a single extra unit that raises your net income by even $15,000 a year can add far more than $15,000 to the appraised value. It also kicks you out of residential FHA and conventional loans entirely and into commercial financing, with its own rates and terms. A basement unit that costs $40,000 to build out legally can sometimes add 6 figures to what the property's worth on refinance. That's why some experienced owners buy a fourplex specifically because it's one legal permit away from being something else. It's a narrow move, zoning has to allow it, And permitting a basement unit isn't cheap or fast. But it's a real lever, and it's one almost nobody mentions in the tenants pay your mortgage pitch. So the format changes the risk, the city changes the price, and the zoning can change what the building even is. Which brings us back to the two numbers that actually matter. What you put in and what you get out. Let's put actual numbers on this, start to finish. Scenario A, a $460,000 fourplex in a Midwest metro, the kind of deal that's everywhere in Indianapolis or Toledo. FHA, 3.5% down, that's $16,100 out of pocket. Add closing costs and a real repair reserve, call it $12,000 more. All in, you're at $28,000 to own the building. 2 years go by, rents creep up the way they usually do, and you add one thing, in-unit laundry for each unit. That single upgrade, plus 2 years of rent growth, is enough to refinance. The refi pulls $22,000 back out in cash. Tax-free because it's a loan, not a sale. You still own the building, you still collect rent, and you've got $380 a month left over after every reserve is funded. Add the equity you pulled to 2 years of that leftover cash flow, and you're around $31,000 in total return. On a $28,000 entry, you got your money back, with a fourplex still attached, in a little over 2 years. Scenario B, same idea, much bigger number. A $1,050,000 fourplex in a fast-growing Sunbelt metro, bought as a straight investment, not a house hack. Conventional loan, 25% down, no FHA, that's $262,500 out of pocket. Closing costs and reserves on a building this size run about $35,000. Total entry, roughly $298,000. Cash flow is tight at first, about $200 a month after reserves. This market isn't paying you to wait, it's paying you to hold. 4 years in, rent growth and appreciation are strong enough to refinance again. This time the pull is $140,000 in equity, cash in hand, building still yours. Stack that against 4 years of thin monthly cash flow, and total return lands around $155,000. On cash flow alone, that's an 8 or 9 year payback. The refinance is what actually changes the math. One honest catch before we close this out. Neither scenario survives a bad 6 months with no reserve. One shared roof, one stretch with 2 empty units, and a year of cash flow is gone. That reserve line isn't optional. It's the whole plan. So here's what you actually bought into. You thought you were the landlord, living rent-free while your tenants covered the note. You're not. You're the one who answers when the furnace dies in Unit 3 in February, whether or not anyone else paid rent that month. The real owner of a fourplex isn't the guy collecting the checks. It's whoever's reserve account is still funded in month 6. That's you. It was always going to be you. $28,000 in, $31,000 out inside 2 years, and you still own the building. That's the actual trade. If you want to see this same math with half the units and half the headache, go watch the House Hack Duplex breakdown next. See you in the next one.